I don't like being paralyzed. Quadriplegia is hard. I deal with chronic pain. That's even harder. It makes my quadriplegia feel like a walk in the park. And so when I wake up in the morning and my friends are still in the kitchen brewing coffee, and I know they're going to come into my bedroom in a minute and greet me and give me a bed bath, do my toileting routines, stretch my legs, get me dressed, sit me up in a wheelchair, brush my teeth, blow my nose. And I'm lying there thinking, God, I don't have strength for this. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. And I cannot do quadriplegia, but I can do all things through you as you strengthen me.
Joni Eareckson Tada is founder and CEO of Joni and Friends, an organization that provides Christian outreach in the disability community by giving practical support and spiritual help to special needs families worldwide. Joni is the author of numerous best-selling books, including Joni and Ken, An Untold Love Story, and When God Weeps. Joni and her husband, Ken, live in Calabasas, California. Joni, so great to be with you. Thanks for coming on Takeaways.
Oh, absolutely, Kirk, and thanks for having me on, sir.
You're one of my favorite people in the world, and I'm so grateful for the story that God has written and demonstrated his faithfulness in your life, and to see how you're serving him is such an example to the rest of us. Joni, talk to those who aren't familiar with your story about what life was like before your accident. What did you like to do, and what was your relationship with God like?
Oh, Kirk, we would have gone camping, hunting, swimming, playing tennis, horseback riding, you name it. I was quite the athlete. And as such, I guess I was the least likely candidate to become a quadriplegic. But as far as my relationship with the Lord goes, Jesus was kind of tucked away in my back hip pocket, and I pulled him out on Sundays and holidays and Easter and Christmas. But when I was a senior in high school, I was frustrated with my shallow life in Christ. And to be honest, Kirk, I had a boyfriend back then, and we were doing some stuff on Friday nights that was pretty embarrassing. It laden me with guilt. Sunday mornings, I'd confess my sins. Oh, God, I'll never do that again. But then the following Friday night in the backseat of my boyfriend's car, there we'd be fooling around again. And, oh, I just hated the sin. I hated the guilt. And I said, finally, Jesus, I have entrapped myself in sin. I've become a slave to it. Would you do something in my life to jerk it right side up? Because I don't want to be a hypocrite, and I don't want to go off to college making a sham of your good name. And Kirk, I prayed a prayer in April of 1967 saying, God, do anything, anything. I just want to honor you from here on out, and you need to help me get free of sin. And then I graduated a couple of months later, and 2 weeks after that, went for a swim in the Chesapeake Bay with my sister, dove into shallow water. My head hit a sandy bottom. It snapped my head back and crunched my vertebrae, snapped my spinal cord, and I was lying face down in the water, paralyzed. And the next thing I knew, my sister was pulling me up out of the water. I was gasping, sputtering, near drowning. And doctors told me, you've broken your neck. You're never going to walk again, or have use of your hands. My hands don't work. I wear arm splints to support them, but that was 55 years ago. And I have to confess, Kirk, that at first I was quite angry at God that he took my prayer so seriously. Like, hello? I mean, aren't you being a little severe? I asked for a closer walk with you, and this is your answer? I thought God was being awfully unfair. But over time, Christians were praying, Christians were loving me, and slowly but surely I came up out of depression, and I began to ask people, why should I trust God if he allowed this to happen? So it was a good question to start me off on this journey.
Wow. I have known you for years now, and my children have gotten to know you a little bit interning at your disability ministry, Joni and Friends. And you're one of the most inspirational people that I know, and I've heard you say things like God permits things that he hates in order to accomplish what he loves. I've heard you say things that I would rather be in this wheelchair knowing Jesus than to be on my feet without him. These are things that are so encouraging and inspiring to us, but they're almost confusing because we don't understand how you could say those things. And what does make sense is what you just mentioned. Why would God let something like this happen? Joni, did you ever feel just downright angry and betrayed by God?
I felt angry. I felt almost betrayed, but to be quite honest, Kirk, I was fearful of turning my back on him because I had nowhere else to go. I was paralyzed. I was sitting in the corner feeling sorry for myself. I needed hope. And I knew that if I was to find hope, it would have to be in God and God alone. And I'll never forget, real quickly, I asked a friend of mine, how can any of this be God's will? Come on. I mean, I thought God's will was only for good stuff. And he said, now, wait a minute, Joni, look at what God allowed in the life of his own son, Jesus. He allowed murder, injustice, torture. I mean, real torture and treason. How can any of that be good in our eyes or even his? But again, you said it. God permits what he hates to accomplish something that he loves. And yes, he hated the torture, the murder, the treason, the injustice that led up to the crucifixion. But the world's worst murder became the world's only salvation. And my friend said, Joni, the same is true in your life or any of our lives. God doesn't like spinal cord injury. He hates suffering. My goodness, when he walked on earth, he spent most of his time trying to relieve it. So he despises the pain and the anguish, but he will allow it to produce something good in your life. And I said, well, what could that possibly be? And he said, how about Christ in you? I mean, the God of the universe dwelling in you, changing you, turning you from a headstrong, stubborn, hypocritical, self-centered teenager into a young woman who, by his grace, might appreciate something of perseverance, patience, endurance, self-control, bravery, courage. And over time, I began to value those virtues in my life. And I think that's when I began to find my smile.
And you do have one of the most joyful smiles of anyone that I know. And Joni, you were enrolled in the most difficult of schools to learn these lessons of patience, of trusting in God, of walking by faith and not by sight. And I've read your book. I know your story better than some. And how do you go from that place to finding and discovering the peace and the joy that animates your smile?
Well, Kirk, I'm going to tell you a secret that I hope all of our viewers will employ tomorrow morning when they wake up. I don't like being paralyzed. Quadriplegia is hard. I deal with chronic pain. That's even harder. It makes my quadriplegia feel like a walk in the park. And so when I wake up in the morning and my friends are still in the kitchen brewing coffee, and I know they're going to come into my bedroom in a minute and greet me and give me a bed bath, do my toileting routines, stretch my legs, get me dressed, sit me up in a wheelchair, brush my teeth, blow my nose. And I'm lying there thinking, God, I don't have strength for this. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. And I cannot do quadriplegia, but I can do all things through you as you strengthen me. And Kirk, by 7:35 in the morning, I've got joy that's already been hard fought for, but it's real, it's profound, it's deep, and it's lasting. And I think sometimes all of us, God has to push us up against the wall where we've got nowhere else to go but turn around, face that wall, and start walking through it. Do the impossible. Just do the impossible and say, I can't do this, but I can. I can do all things through you, Jesus, as you strengthen me. And what do you know? God specializes in doing impossible things, and he will give you that ability to persevere, to endure, to be patient, to move forward, to be courageous, to be brave. Oh, And there's nothing better than having those virtues well up within your heart every morning and get you facing the day.
And I know that you have personal, regular disciplines of reading God's Word and allowing your mind to be saturated with the promises of God. And you don't just read them, you sing them. Every time I come into Joni and Friends ministry building, I hear this angelic voice somewhere in the halls or in the chapel, and it's Joni singing another hymn. A mighty fortress is our
God.
That's right. And the doxology, and these are the things that I know have reminded you of the faithfulness and promises of God, and you've appropriated them in ways that many people have never had to, but you make it real for us too.
Yeah, well, Psalm 119, verse 50 says, "This is my comfort in suffering." Okay, like what? What is it? What is your comfort in suffering? What your promises renew my life. And so, Kirk, you're absolutely right. I memorize Bible promises left, right, and center, and I sing them. I sing my way through suffering. I sing because I have to sing. I mean, my circumstances are so awful. There's no better word for it. They're just awful. I mean, I could cry talking about it. They are so hard and harsh. I've got to anchor myself, like it says in Hebrews. We got to make Christ our anchor, firm and secure. I've hooked the corner of that anchor over the mercy seat, and I am not letting go. Jesus, don't let me go. I'm thinking of Psalm 63. My spirit clings to you, but it is your right hand that upholds me. I mean, I cling to him, and it's a little weak, half-hearted grip, but I've got the right arm of God's strong salvation gripping me. He's not going to let go as long as I continue to yield myself to him. And that's what I do every morning. Don't be thinking, and I hope none of your viewers think this is easy. Man, it's not easy. It's so darn hard. But I'm like Peter. Where else do I turn? Lord, you have the words of life. So I'm going to eat those words of life. I'm going to memorize those words of life, those Bible promises, and make them my own. And I would encourage our viewers to do the same if they're struggling.
Joni, you help so many people with disabilities to learn and not only survive, but to thrive and deepen their faith in God. What are some of the misunderstandings about people with disabilities that you can share?
Well, sometimes we look at someone in a wheelchair, someone who is blind, and we define them by that wheelchair. We define them by the white cane. We define people by their intellectual limitations. But people with disabilities have hopes, dreams. They might be listening to audio books, their favorite books. They have vacation memories, favorite restaurants. I mean, let's learn to look at people with disabilities as more than just, their wheelchair or their white cane. We are people who need Jesus just as much as the next person. Even young children with Down syndrome. We all have wicked hearts that need to be rescued from sin. Even a child with Down syndrome, that. And so all of us need Jesus in one way or another. And so when you look at people with disabilities, just treat them as you would any new friend. Get to know them. Ask about their family. Ask about their favorite places in the neighborhood, restaurants to eat. Do you have any favorite movies? What are you reading these days? Just don't ask always about the disability, because we're more than just the definitions of our spinal cord injury.
Joni, I want everyone to know about this amazing organization that you started called Joni and Friends. Would you share a little bit about what it is and why you started the Joni and Friends Disability Ministry?
Kirk, 4, 5, 6 years after my diving accident, and I'd come up out of depression, and my church was so supportive, and I was being blessed so much. I was growing, I was changing, I was finding joy in my hardships, sorrowful yet always rejoicing. I was experiencing so many benefits from the Lord. It's like, I can't keep these to myself. I just can't keep this to myself. I gotta pass the good news on to other people with disabilities. I found so much hope, so much joy. Oh my goodness, there's so many other people in the country and around the world who are suffering far more than I am. And I want to give them the same good news that transformed my life. And so that's pretty much why I started Joni and Friends. I'm just one lady. I can't do it by myself. So I got a lot of friends here in the States and around the world who carry out our programs to give the good news of Jesus to millions of people with disabilities who, as I said, are in circumstances far more challenging than mine ever will be. So it all got started because I wanted to pass on the blessing.
And let me tell you, it is the real deal, everyone. The Joni and Friends International Disability Center is right down the road from where my family lives, and my children have interned there at Joni and Friends, and what a blessing that is. They have learned so much from you personally and from all the staff there and the volunteers, and you're helping people with wheelchairs and delivering the gospel, and Joni is writing books, and her paintings are inspiring people all over the world. Joni, one of the questions that I think about is, what is living with a disability like in a developing nation, in a third world country, in places where you don't have the Mayo Clinic, you don't have Cedars-Sinai Hospital or Johns Hopkins?
Well, I remember in 1989, I was in the Philippines, and it was during the monsoon season. I was there speaking at a pastor's conference, and I was waiting outside the stadium with an umbrella over me, and I looked across the street, and there was a woman who dragged herself through the muddy road. She was dragging her paralyzed legs behind her, and she came up to the back door of a restaurant and tucked her legs up underneath of her and sat there quietly by the door until someone opened and handed her a bag of scraps. And I asked my pastor friend, I asked about her, and he said, well, I know that woman. She's a respectable woman, a good woman, and things should not be like this in our nation. They should not be like this in anywhere else in the world. You know, dragging your legs behind you through a dirty, muddy street, trying to avoid traffic, begging for food. I saw that, Kirk. And on my way home on the airplane, I said, Lord Jesus, if you could please use my life to make a difference in that woman's life, I'd give anything. I'll do anything. It was my first experience with someone who was that disabled and who was that impoverished. And so right away, I came home and I said, team, we've got to make a difference in the lives of people like I saw in the Philippines, because there are millions of them just like that around the world. And of course, having traveled to 60 countries, I've seen many sites like that replicated time and time again, where people with disabilities live like homeless people. They live under bridges, alongside rivers. They do the best they can. They're relegated to back bedrooms, often in Southeast Asia. Their parents are ashamed of them. There's much social stigma connected to disability. So when we take wheelchairs around the world, and we've delivered hundreds of thousands of wheelchairs and Bibles, it's not only about giving a wheelchair, it's about changing the culture of disability and helping people see that a disability is not a curse from the local shaman, or it's not a curse from the witch doctor or the animist spirits, but we're all image bearers of our great creator God. In one way or another, we're image bearers of the Lord Jesus. And that's what we want to do through every wheelchair that we deliver, through every retreat that we have for families struggling with disability, either here in the United States or around the world in developing nations. We want to change people's perspective on disability. Because I think, Kirk, that the devil thinks that disability is his last frontier. This is he's going to make a stand against the goodness of God. He's going to use disability as ammunition against the goodness of God, spitefully saying, look, how can God call himself good if he allows this child to be born with that birth defect? You can't call yourself good, God. So that's what we want to change, that perspective. And that's the point behind all the program services that we have, to not only give physical support, but spiritual hope in the Bible and in the good news of Jesus.
Amazing. Wonderful. Joni, can you share with us maybe one story that you might remember of how a wheelchair changes somebody's life? Maybe you can think of somebody in the Philippines or Africa or in Asia or even here in the United States. What does it mean to someone to finally be able to be mobile?
Well, I remember when I was in Africa, we were doing a wheelchair distribution, and a family came in carrying something in a blanket. I didn't know what it was, but they had all four corners of the blanket, and they carried this young teenager in. He was severely disabled. His limbs were contorted and twisted. He had never had any physical therapy, so he was quite stiff. And there he spent all his days lying in that burlap sack, being carried from place to place in a blanket. And our Wheels for the World team worked 7 hours to construct for him a wheelchair that would be adequate, that would recline, that had chest supports and a shoulder harness, that had side supports, that had elevating leg lifts. I mean, it was a zippity-doo-dah perfect wheelchair for this young boy. And I'll never forget when they sat him in it, he was able to reach the wheelchair rims with his hands. And for the first time in his life, he was able to move himself just inches, and he broke out in laughter. He was so excited, and then when he realized he could do, we couldn't stop him. He was pushing that wheelchair as hard as he could all over the distribution site, just laughing, and his mother and father were weeping tears of gratitude. But the best part is we gathered that family together, and a local pastor was able to share in their language the gospel of Jesus Christ. They opened their hearts to the Lord for the very first time. The pastor said something to us afterward. He said, this is a family my church would not normally care about. But I see you people and the love you have for them, and I know now God has love for them, and I'm going to make them a part of our church. Oh, that just made me I was so excited, because not only did this family come to Christ, but that whole congregation was transformed as they began to see that God's power always shows up in weakness. He delights in showcasing his love to the vulnerable, the poor, the unlikely, the unlovely. These are the ones that he wants gathered into our congregations, because then his power can explode through them. And I saw it that day in Africa. That was quite something there in Ethiopia.
Joni, you mentioned earlier that it's important that when we meet someone with a disability that we don't define them by their disability. Where should we find our value? What determines our true worth? Whether we're able or disabled, whether we're experiencing discomfort or comfort, how do we stay focused on God and determine our value?
Well, our value comes from the fact that we bear the image of God, for sure. And our value comes from knowing that the Lord Jesus Christ died the most excruciatingly painful, anguished, horrific death to secure for us a home in heaven. I mean, when I think of myself, I do not think of myself primarily as a quadriplegic or even a pain sufferer or even in my 70s. No, I think of myself as a blood-bought believer in the Lord Jesus. Mm-hmm. And he is the one who gives me value. He is the one who has a plan for my life, a plan for your life, a plan for the lives of all of those who are watching us right now. A beautiful plan. And sometimes it could be as humble as being a witness to our husband or our children, a witness to our neighbors, just being a witness to the people at our church. I mean, or we could be my bedridden friends. They are prayer warriors. They see their value in the kingdom as being intercessors for God's great kingdom all across the globe. So we all have a purpose, and God promises us in the Psalms, he will fulfill his purposes in our life. He will not abandon the work of his hands. So every day I pray from Philippians, Lord God, carry to completion that which you have begun in me until the very last breath. I know I'm living for a purpose. So I just want to partner with you to find out what that is today. It's a great way to live.
Joni, thank you for that answer. I'm so glad that you and Ken are friends of me and Chelsea and our family. You are a gift to us and to so many people. Thanks for joining me on Takeaways today.
Oh, Kirk, always good to be with you, sir. I love you so much.
Wow, Joni's life is a testament to what God can do through those who surrender to him despite life's greatest challenges. Laura Wifler is the co-founder of Risen Motherhood, which is a ministry that brings gospel hope to moms around the world. Her latest book is Like Me, a story about disability and discovering God's image in every person. Laura, her husband, and her 3 kids live in central Iowa. Laura, thanks so much for coming on Takeaways.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I have 6 kids.
Yeah.
My wife and I have loved raising our children, and you have a beautiful daughter named, you have 3 kids, but
Yeah.
a beautiful daughter named Eden who was born with a disability.
That's right. Yes.
And so many of us know people who have kids with disabilities or have recently had a child who's been diagnosed with the unexpected disability. What was that like to get the diagnosis from the doctor?
Yeah, well, Eden is 5 years old today, but when she was 2 months old, that's when she was diagnosed. And, you know, she received a rare chromosome diagnosis, which means she's the only child in the world that they know of that has what she has. So that meant there wasn't a spectrum, there wasn't a path, and in many ways it felt like there was no one else who could understand us or what we were going through. And actually the doctors told us, hey, you know, we can look at other similar cases, and what we can see is more than likely she will never walk, she will never talk, so just prepare yourselves for that. And you can imagine, being a dad, that was really, really hard as parents to receive that diagnosis. And of course, we go all the way to, okay, this is the reality, this is truth. And yet we had to learn to pull back and say, okay, I just want to look at our daughter right now. Because every time I moved away from like the diagnosis on paper, and I would look at my beautiful girl, I would just feel like, no, there's hope and there's goodness, but it's hard. It's a tension as a parent when you go through that diagnosis. And what's been incredible, though, is that she has really unfolded. We've discovered her over the years, it feels like, and she can now walk. She is starting to talk, and she has many words, and she's learning her letters in kindergarten right now. So it's really, really incredible to just see where the Lord brought her.
Wow. That's got to just take your breath away.
Yeah.
When you got the diagnosis at 2 months old, did you know that there was something different prior to the 2 months diagnosis?
When I was pregnant, towards the end of the pregnancy, we knew there was a chance that she would have disabilities. I was maybe 36 weeks pregnant, and they had said to us, hey, either, you know, maybe it's just some of the ways that your body's working, or maybe it's your child. We're not really sure, but let's just find out. So they actually induced me at 37 weeks, a little bit early, and she was just a little over 4 pounds at the time. So we didn't know, though. We actually thought, oh, we're okay. She's just little. She's just really small. And yet, as you mentioned, I have 2 other children, and I kind of sensed as time went on, hey, there's something different here. So we did kind of push for diagnosis. So
what is a typical day like for you and your family, and how does Eden's disability affect your day?
Yeah. Well, in many ways, it's a lot like everyone else's. You know, our house is loud and it's fun and there's messes.
Yeah.
But specifically for Eden, more than typically developing children, she does have more doctor's appointments. She does have therapy. We go once a week, and she gets OT, PT, and the occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physical therapy. So she gets all of those. And then at school also, she's enrolled in a local public school, and they are wonderful to be able to give her some therapies as well. So she's pulled out of the classroom a little bit more. But overall, I would say we have lots of appointments, but also we have lots of fun and laughter, just like every other family.
And you just wrote a book, and your book is called Like Me, a story about disability and discovering God's image in every person. Why did you write this book, and what are you hoping parents will get out of it?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Well, Like Me is just a story about 2 siblings, and it follows them throughout their day. And one of the children, the younger brother, he has significant disabilities that affects him holistically. And we really follow them throughout the day, much like I was explaining our days, where they go to therapy, and they also, though, in the afternoon, they sled, and they have cocoa, and they read books by the fire. And so the hope behind this book is, of course, that it's a book you can snuggle up on the couch and read with your family again and again, and it's just a cozy, fun read. But also, I really hoped to put some messages in that help to really naturally teach children about disability. So there's a mom in the story and a dad, and they're kind of dropping some wisdom throughout, and the older brother narrates and talks about what his parents have taught him about disabilities. And the biggest thing I want this book to serve as is a springboard for conversations for parents, to be able to tackle a topic that I know can feel really fraught, and it can feel really hard to talk to your kids about disabilities. And so my hope is that this book will drop spiritual truths into your little child's heart, and you can springboard on those conversations to have some important discussions in your family.
Yeah. One of your biggest hopes and prayers for Eden is that as she grows up, that she will have a real sense of her own identity and real, solid, meaningful friendships. How does teaching parents and children about people being made in the image of God help with that?
Yes, that is huge. I mean, the image of God is a foundational truth for us as Christians. And I think oftentimes it can get kind of glossed over or passed over because we don't know how to talk about it or teach about it. But really, being made in the image of God means that you have inherent dignity, worth, and value, no matter who you are. And I think for Eden, when I look specifically at children with disabilities, this is so important and so valuable, not only for her to know that it's okay that her body doesn't function like everyone else's around her, or maybe her mind thinks differently, but it's also so important for everyone else around to be able to bestow honor and dignity on her. And I think one thing that's easy for us to do with people with disabilities is we pity them. We can feel, when I received the diagnosis, I will be honest and say that I felt pity. And I even felt self-pity for me to have to go through that. And one of the things that I have learned over the years is that pity isn't the right response to someone with a disability. That's not what they're asking for. That's not what they need. If anything, they need compassion paired with dignity. And that is so important to offer all people, where we say, I see your circumstances. I see that perhaps life is a little bit harder for you. I see that life isn't going the way it typically does, but also I offer you dignity where I can treat you with value, with kindness, with just the ability to recognize that you are worthy of my time. It really transforms how you see other people and how you see yourself.
That is so important. And just by way of reminder for us, back in the book of Genesis is where we get this idea of the Imago Dei, which is that phrase for the image of God, that God made us in His image. And that is so important, whether we're white or black, short or tall, whether we're academically gifted or we're athletically gifted or relationally or musically gifted. God's made us in His image, and He's got a special call and identity, purpose, and destiny for us, regardless of our differences. Laura, speak to somebody who may not have a disability, but they define themselves by their abilities, like we were just talking about. And then when those abilities decline or go away, their sense of worth diminishes. So how should somebody define their identity and their purpose and value?
Yeah, this is a huge question that all of us at some point will have to face. And for so long, you're right, we can kind of ride on our resume or trophies or accolades, and we feel really good about everything. But over time, at some point, those things will fail us. And so you're left with, am I valuable? What makes me inherently worthy? And that is where we go back to God's word, and we know that God made us in His image, and He declared us worthy. He declared us good in the garden. And so we can know, just like Psalms talks about, that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God knows us intimately. He knows us full well. And those are things that we can look back on and say, because I'm made in the image of God, I still have value, I still have worth, I still have things to contribute to this world. And I think that's where ultimately, if our identity is not rooted there, very quickly we will begin to feel like there's no hope for us. And yet, like you said, in each moment, God has a purpose for our life.
As a parent, what do you do when you see children saying things about your child with disability, like, Mom, why is that little girl look like that? Or why is she sitting on a chair with wheels?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, first off, I would say I have a lot of compassion for these parents. I have been there. Even my other children who are around disabilities a lot, they will still be like, what is that? And just kind of act like they've never seen such a thing. So I get this. But the first thing I would say as parents, we can model right behavior, And so I think our tendency is to want to be like, shh, no, don't say that. We want to shush them and hide away. But instead, we can actually lean into those questions, because kiddos are really, they're trying to categorize the world. They're trying to understand the world. They're saying, hey, is this safe? Is this not safe? Is this good? Is this bad? And that's our job as parents, is to really raise them to know, okay, this is safe. This is good. So one of the ways that we do that as parents is when your child kind of says something sort of embarrassing at the grocery store or wherever it may be,
Yeah.
I think we can just start by having a warm smile and saying, oh, that's a wheelchair. That helps that person get where they want to go. So one of the big keys, I think, with disabilities is for young children to see that that person isn't as other as they feel. So instead to be able to say, oh, and look, that wheelchair's blue. You love the color blue. Isn't that cool?
Right,
So just
right.
drawing that connection of like there's
Yep.
sameness there, I think helps the child as well.
Can you talk about what some of your other children learned growing up with a sister
Yeah.
who has a disability?
I think one of the things I have been most encouraged by with my children is seeing just the way that they are so sacrificially kind to her. My older daughter takes my younger daughter with disabilities into school every day. She helps figure out the lunch situation. She helps put away her backpack. She tells the teacher any little needs that she might have. And this is a second grader we're talking about. She's helping my youngest daughter. And it's just incredible to watch. We have a phrase in our family that we say is my life for yours. And what we mean by that is that Christ gave his life for us, and therefore now we can lay down our life for others. And you'll hear my kids every once in a while say, my life for yours, and they're just going off and serving and caring for someone. But it's been this great phrase that has, I think, shown a remembrance of what God did for us, and that this life isn't really about us. I think that's our natural inclination, right? Life is about me, what I want to do, my needs, and they have learned, I think, at an early age, not perfectly, of course, and I have yet to launch them, so I want to be hesitant and careful about what I say, but it seems to me that they are learning at a pretty young age about how to lay down their life for someone else, which I think is a really beautiful thing and something that took me a lot longer to learn. So,
I think that will turn out to be, in God's economy, one of the great gifts that your other children have been given.
Yeah.
And I can say that because I know people who have siblings who have great disabilities, and the amount of compassion that has grown in them makes them admirable people.
Yes.
People that I think I trust more with their character because they have grown up having to take care of other people, and that sense of compassion or sympathy has really grown in them.
Yes.
And that is a gift.
Yeah.
An unexpected gift, but an important gift.
Yeah, it's grown in me compassion as well. When we talked a little bit earlier about the ways the Lord is using sanctification in my life and this to sanctify me, I know that that's been something that I feel like it's opened me up to a whole new world that I never saw, and it's really drawn in me an awareness of some of the difficulties that people go through, and it's really changed my perspective on how to be kind to other people and to see people. And when I see someone else with disabilities, I've really learned, okay, I want to go up to them and I want to smile. And I'll even have my kids and there's some people that we're around that are totally non-speaking. They're in a wheelchair. They're not able to communicate in traditional ways. And we will go up and my son will just lay his hand on someone's shoulder or elbow, and we'll just smile and be there and talk and just realizing again that life isn't about you and your comfort. For so many of us, when we're around disabilities, we're afraid because we think it might feel awkward. We think it might feel uncomfortable. And over time, I've just learned that that's okay. It's okay to feel awkward. It's okay to feel uncomfortable because, like you're saying, in the kingdom economy, that is absolutely worth it. And that time spent shows that person the dignity with compassion that we can pair together and say, well, I would really want someone to say hi to me, even if I couldn't communicate that back. So I'm going to go do that for that person.
What does the Bible say about disability?
Yeah, well, I'm thankful because the Bible is not silent to this topic, and that God addresses hard things in his word. And I think perhaps the most famous passage, of course, is John 9:1-3. And that's a great area for anyone to study who would like to learn more about disabilities. The biggest hope that it has brought to me is John 9. This is where the disciples are talking with Jesus, and Jesus sees a man who was born blind on the road. And the disciples notice Jesus noticing him, and they say, hey, Jesus, why was this man born blind? And they assume that it's because of sin on the parents' part, sin on the person's part. But yet Jesus tells his disciples to stop looking at the cause, but instead to look at the purpose. And he says, this man was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And that is an incredibly hopeful passage for anyone who has a child with disabilities or is suffering from disabilities themselves, that God is encouraging us to say, hey, we don't need to focus on the cause, because sometimes disabilities are caused by sin. Sometimes there is something that's happened in someone's life that was sinful. More than often, though, it's just up to the hand of God and him sovereignly being over a person's body. Yet we see that Jesus tells his disciples, hey, this is for the works of God to be displayed. And so there is a purpose in disabilities. There is a reason for disabilities. This is not some random act where God's trying to catch up with disabilities, but instead we can know that God has a design and a purpose for people, and that's to give him glory. That is so encouraging, because that's the goal of our lives, is to glorify God, and we know that those with disabilities can do that.
Yeah, and you would think that one of the most comforting and helpful places that people with disabilities could go to would be the church.
Yeah.
However, many churches don't know how to deal with the disability community. So what would a church that's very inclusive and welcoming of the disabled look like? Yeah,
I think a lot of us think about being inclusive looks like having handicap parking or tactile pavement or things like that. Yeah. But you're right, it goes so much more beyond that. And so for any church, I know churches have different budgets, they have different abilities, they have different ministry sizes, and so it's hard to give like this blanket thing. But what I would really encourage any church to do is to have eyes to see those who have disabilities, and just to have one or two people appointed to say, hey, we want you to notice if anyone comes in that has a disability, or a family that has a child with a disability, and for you to go to them and say, welcome, we're so glad you're here, and how can we help you be successful? What can we do to help your family feel welcome? And that might mean there's a sensory-free room. That might mean that there is an aid for a child who can tend to run off. That might mean help in making sure that someone can get into service and can worship in a way that is compatible to the way their neurodivergence is. And so I think those are things where each church is probably going to have individual ways that this plays out, but it's a posture that says, hey, we want to serve you, we want to make sure you feel welcomed, and we see you and we're not afraid.
Yeah, we want to help you. We're here for you. We're on your side. Yeah. We're cheering you on. How do people do that better? I think sometimes people who are not familiar with disabilities, they come up to somebody and they immediately notice that you're in a wheelchair, or they notice that you're not speaking, or that you look different.
Yeah, right.
How can people approach someone with disabilities with the right mindset?
The term disability is really broad, right? You can be talking about an amputee who is, cognitively a genius. And you can also be talking about someone who has cognitive delays and really is struggling, needs a lot of assistance to be able to kind of live in this world. And so I think there's a broad range that we're talking about here, but what I would encourage anyone to do is there is an element of just treating them like another person. And we might see that, hey, this is just someone with disabilities, and we can't predict the way they're going to engage or behave, but that doesn't change the way our posture needs to be and the way we engage as people. So I think it's probably, in some levels saying, I'm going to focus on the person and treat them just like anyone else. But also, at some point, it may be a good chance for you to say, hey, is there anything I can do to help you have the right accommodation so that you can be successful here, or so that you feel welcome here? So there can be open doors for that as well, depending on your relationship with that person.
And I love how some friends with disabilities actually break the ice for us, like my friend Nick Vujicic, who has a ministry called Life Without Limbs, so no arms and no legs. He'll say, here, let me give you a hand with that. And you're just like, Nick.
I know.
And I think what he's wanting us to know is, I'm just like you. Yeah. We're the same. We're a person.
I know. There's somebody that I have a relationship with in town, and he does have cognitive delays, and yet pretty high functioning. But I remember, there was this day where he came in and his glasses were incredibly dirty, and even his pants were not zipped up; they were held up by a belt. And I spoke with him for a while. We had a great conversation, but I remember getting in the car a little bit later and saying to my husband, I just wanted to clean his glasses for him. I just felt like, I just wanted to clean them, and I just wanted to tell him about his pants and all these things. And what I realized in that moment was I wanted to make myself feel more comfortable. And he was perfectly fine the way that he was engaging with the world and what he was doing. And, I'm not sure that he could see out of those glasses, but he was doing just fine. And I think that's something that a lot of us is we kind of feel like, we want to help and fix and like be kind of careful around things and make somebody feel more more shaped towards our world and our expectations. And I think that's one thing that has been really powerful for me to recognize is it's not about me and my comfort. And if that person is doing just fine, at the end of the day, like, I don't need to step into that or make them change. Because I think often about my daughter and how she spends 7 hours a day trying to make all of us feel comfortable through her behavior, through her attitudes, through her actions, right? She goes to therapies all day long to try to help make her function in a world with regular developing people. And this is something that I think about a lot, is that most of us spend very little time knowing how to engage the disabled community and knowing how to be around people with disabilities. Things like this are making great changes, and I appreciate that. But that would be like one of my big challenges for people, is to say that a lot of people with disabilities are working very hard to fit into our world, to fit into an able-bodied world.
Right.
And I would just ask that people would spend an hour, 2, 3, or more learning how to engage with people with disabilities and understanding even things like what I went through, which was, hey, is this something that really needs change for this person? Or is that just like the way they're learning to function in the world and it's okay?
Do you think that the entertainment industry and including books, television shows, and movies are making disabilities more apparent? And is that an opportunity that we as parents could take advantage of to teach our children about how to engage with the disabled community?
Yes, this is great. There's been a ton of great changes, I think, in the last 20 years or so for representation and just the importance of showing people with differently able-bodied bodies. And for parents, this does present an incredible opportunity for them to just take a second and point out disabilities. I think it's funny because a lot of times we'll be watching something, let's just take a kid's movie, for example, like How to Train Your Dragon, a very common one. And you just watch the movie and take it in, it's great. But what the reality is that the main character in there, Hiccup, he is an amputee. He has a prosthetic limb. And that is a great opportunity. You don't have to pause the movie or anything, but later in the minivan or wherever you are, to say, hey, do you remember that movie we were watching? And did you see what he had on his leg? Do you have any questions about that? And another way I think that we can talk about it is that, especially if you look beyond, 10, 20 years ago, sometimes the descriptions and depictions of people with disabilities are not good, right? A lot of times they're the villains, they're the one to be afraid of. I think of like Quasimodo or different movies like that maybe a lot of us don't show our kids necessarily, but there are a lot of negative depictions. Even Captain Hook might be a classic that we engage in, and he's the villain. And I think one thing we can also talk with our kids about, if we do choose to show movies like that to them, is to say, hey, what was honoring about the way people treated that person? What was God honoring? And then we can also say, was there things in there that didn't honor God with how they treated that person? And how would you feel if you were treated that way based on the way that you looked or the way that you acted? So there are lots of ways to springboard conversations through media.
Laura, there are over 3 million children with disabilities in the United States. How would you encourage parents right now who are just feeling like they're walking through this alone, they just aren't sure of the future? How could you encourage them?
Yeah. Well, for anyone who feels alone in their journey with disabilities, again, I understand. I remember feeling that same way. It's, I think, really normal. Yet, my biggest encouragement to someone like that is to first of all know that God sees you and he knows and he cares for you and he cares for your child. I think something that took a bit for me to wrap my mind around was remembering that God loves my daughter more than I do. And I love my daughter so much my heart could just explode, right? And to imagine that God's love is more, that was a good truth for me to cling to and remember that he has a good plan. He has that purpose that we talked about. And I think another thing is I would encourage that person who feels alone to find community. Living in this time of life, we can get on social media or we can get in other places connected through maybe our therapist or through doctors and find other people who maybe it's not the same exact journey, but have similar things going on. So just for them to find other people who can support them that understand what it's like to have a child with disabilities.
Joni Eareckson Tada and Laura Wifler shared so many insights from today's conversations about both being disabled and caring for the disabled. Let's review some of our takeaways. There is comfort in suffering. Joni shared a psalm that has been an anchor for her in her personal struggle with disability. My comfort in my suffering is this: your promise preserves my life. She encouraged us to absorb the promises of God written in His Word when we suffer, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual. God's comfort is assured because it's tied to His promises. And one of those promises is that He is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Lend a helping hand. Joni encouraged us to look past the wheelchair or the white cane and resist the temptation to define a person by their limitations. Really see the person and treat them as you would treat any new friend. Joni said disability can be isolating, so get to know the person. Try to understand what they're going through and offer practical help, like meals or visits when you can. Every person is made in God's image. Laura reminded us of this foundational truth of the Bible. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? It means that every person has inherent dignity, worth, and value. She pointed out that pity is not the right response to a disabled person. The right response to any image bearer is compassion paired with dignity. Be okay with being uncomfortable. Laura shared that life is not about us and our comfort. It's okay to feel awkward around someone with a disability. She suggested that instead of shushing our children's questions about the disabled, we should lean into them and use the opportunity to model right behavior. After all, the disabled work hard to fit into our world. In return, we should learn how to graciously engage with theirs.